Save Queen of Sheba by Louise Moeri. Chapter 9. King David, it's the Valley of the Dry Bones! King David, still leading the mare while Queen of Sheba rode, yanked her to a halt and stared around. They had just crossed a saddle between two low hills and entered a small vale of perhaps a third of a mile square. Before them on every side lay clumps and clusters of bleached bones, great arching ribs, convoluted vertebrae, thick and heavy leg bones, huge skulls with horns still attached. Tufts of dry grass and prickly pears laden with sharp spears glistened through the ivory thickets, and lizards darted here and there, almost too fast to see. I don't know what it is. King David stumbled as his foot collided with one of the skulls. I never seen so many. Queen of Sheba leaned forward fearfully. Are they people's bones? King David's eyes raked over the bones nearest him. Oh, of course not, he said impatiently. They're too big to be people's bones. And people don't have horns. He raised his foot and tried to kick the skull out of the way, but it was too heavy for him even to move. Look at them, Queen of Sheba. They're buffalo. People don't have skulls like that, or horns, or ribs that big around. Queen of Sheba looked doubtful. I don't know what kind of ribs people have. I never seen any. I think this is the Valley of the Dry Bones, like it tells about in the Bible. King David shaded his eyes and tried to make a rough count of the skeletons, but quit after he reached 39. The sun, glancing off the stark white surfaces of the bone, made splinters of light that pained him, and the wind streaming through the rib cages whistled eerily in his ears. Behind him, Maggie snorted nervously, raising first one hind foot and then the other as if to kick. She could still scent death even now when the blood, the torn flesh, the stink of corruption were long since burned away from the slaughtered buffalo carcasses by the prairie sun. King David glanced over his shoulder, wondering if he would be able to lead the mare across the valley, or if they would have to go around. Maggie was jumpy as a hare, and could easily snap the rope out of his hand and charge off across country if she took the notion. But he hated the idea of turning aside. Every step added to their journey made the outcome more doubtful. Queen of Sheba, he said, maybe you better get off and walk while we go across here. Maggie's liable to act up and you might get thrown off. Queen of Sheba shivered. I ain't going to walk through them dry bones, she said flatly. They're going to rise up and live again. Oh, stop that, said King David irritably. This ain't the Valley of the Dry Bones where the Lord raised dead people up and put muscles and skin on them. That was in, well, someplace over in Jerusalem, I think. Anyway, a long way from here. And these ain't people. They're buffalo. How do you know? You ain't ever seen dead buffalo before. But I can see... Ugh, what's the use? Stay on the horse, then. Hang on. And if she starts to buck, jump off quick. I gotta hang on to the rope, and I might not be able to catch you. King David jerked the rope, but Maggie seemed to have turned to stone. Immovable. He jerked again, and her ears flattened. Queen of Sheba watched the horse uneasily and peered down at the ground. I don't want to fall down on them dry bones, she muttered. They're going to rise again. Oh, forget about them. You ain't got the sense of the Lord gave a goose. They're just old buffalo bones. King David got a better grip on the halter rope and hauled hard on it as Maggie leaned backwards, her legs like 4 heavy tree trunks rooted in the earth. Her eyes were beginning to roll. I know what it is now, panted King David. Buffalo, killed here by hide hunters. Pa told me about them. He stopped pulling on the halter rope to catch his breath. The slightest extra effort exhausted him. Maybe if he let the mare stand for a few more minutes, she would calm down. Otherwise, they would have to make a detour around the area, adding almost another mile to their already endless odyssey. Queen of Sheba folded her arms. If they're buffalo, why would somebody kill all this many in one place? They couldn't nobody eat this many buffaloes at once. King David eyed the horse. She seemed steadier now, and he sank to one knee, resting the stock of the heavy sharps on the ground beside him. I told you, he said absently. They've been shot by hide hunters. Hide hunters just kill all the buffalo they can and take the skins off and leave the carcasses to rot. They don't eat the meat. They just take the skins. What for? Queen of Sheba asked doubtfully. To be sold, tanned for buffalo ropes. To make leather, maybe? I don't know. I guess they make money that way. Maggie lowered her head and her velvet muzzle dusted lightly over the huge skull that lay near them. King David could see a shiver of fear that rippled over her, like water rippling when the wind blows. He hoped she would sense that the skull, the bones, held no threat for them. I don't believe you, said Queen of Sheba. Mr. Skinner killed a buffalo for us once, and all the families got some of the meat, and it was good to eat. I'm hungry. Yeah, of course it's good meat. That's why the Indians hunt buffalo. Maybe the Indians ate these. No, it's hide hunters did this. Indians couldn't have killed this many altogether out in the open. And they would have carried lots of pieces away to cook and make jerky of. That way, lots of the bones would be missing now. No, nobody ate this meat. It just laid here and rotted and was wasted. The hot wind blowing across the vale made no noise, and King David could hear his own voice as loud as if it were a thunderclap. The wind had no smell either, but he could imagine the terrible stench that must have filled this part of the prairie long ago, when the mighty beasts were killed and left to putrefy in the hot sun. The Indians must have been able to smell it from miles away, and knew as they drew the odor into their nostrils that the flesh of those slaughtered beasts would never boil into savory stew to feed them, their children, their old folks. Sioux bellies must have growled with hunger at that smell. The stink was probably still with them as they sighted down their arrow shafts at white faces, at men who killed for hides, for fur, and left good meat to rot. Maggie raised her head. She seemed to be satisfied that the skull would not attack her. King David crawled to his feet, picking up the rifle. I'm going to try to lead her across, he said. Hang on tight. Queen of Sheba gripped the hames, and her eyes rolled nervously from side to side as King David jerked the halter rope and started forward. Maggie snorted and balked, but at last took one reluctant step, another, and another. Down in the swale, the sense of death was even stronger. King David found himself glancing left and right, back over his shoulders, as he guided the mare between the piles of bones. Suddenly, Queen of Sheba let out a squeal. Look! See, I told you! Them bones over there are going to rise! King David snapped around to look where she was pointing. There indeed was a pile of bones that stirred, rustled, rattled. Oh, hell. Queen of Sheba, that's only a snake, a rattler, inside a bunch of bones. Even at this distance, King David could clearly see the writhing brown and gray length of the huge prairie rattler as it lay coiled to strike, Its tail was a blur, but he could hear the fierce staccato warning of danger, of death. Maggie's head snapped up, straining the halter rope to the utmost. Her eyes showed white and her feet began to dance as she threw herself to the right, away from the snake. "Shoot it!" cried Queen of Sheba. "What for?" King David fought to keep his hold on the rope as his feet dug furrows in the dirt. "It's a snake. He ain't going to hurt us that far away, and I can't waste a bullet." "Kill it! Kill it!" "No." They were past the snake now, and picking their way up the next slope. Maggie swung her head to look back, snorting, and Queen of Sheba's face was wild. "Why don't you kill it?" she cried. "What's the use? It's like killing flies. 100 more would come to the funeral, and we didn't get hurt. Anyway, there's been enough killing out here." When they topped the rim of the swall, they halted. Panting, King David mopped the sweat from his eyes. As they looked back over the silent field of death, the pile of bones that hid the snake settled, with a soft clacking sound, into a different shape as the reptile crawled away. Now the row of ribs stabbed up at the sky, like the fingers of a dying man. "See," muttered Queen of Sheba. "I was right. I told you these bones would rise." It took him until late in the morning to locate the main track of the wagons. It appeared that, in the confusion after the raid, the wagons of a few of the survivors had been separated from the rest, and it took him several wide passes to find the place where he felt they had all assembled again. The sun was in the noon position when he stood on the crest of a low rise and squinted ahead to where a broad path of wheel tracks, tumbled rocks, and crushed grass marked the trail. "Where is Ma and Pa, King David? I want to catch up with Ma." Queen of Sheba, perched on Maggie's broad back with one hand gripping the hame for balance and the other clutching her doll, wriggled restlessly. "I don't know why Pa called you King David. You can't even find Pa and Ma in the wagon. You don't look like no king to me." King David glared weakly at his sister. "All right," he said. "Don't call me King David no more. From now on, you can't talk to me at all, unless you call me by my middle name. Alexander." "That'll hold her," he told himself. "That old Creek fellow's name that I heard about in school once, that'll hold her for a while." King David was surprised and pleased at his own ingenuity in devising a plan of such bloodless cruelty. Telling Queen of Sheba that she couldn't rave at him was meaner than hitting her, and wouldn't even leave a bruise that Pa and Ma would hold him to account for. He grinned. "Man." "No." "Inca, no. Don't talk to me unless you can say it right." "Inca, Salanka." Queen of Sheba's voice slid up to an eerie howl. "Sander?" She took a deep breath and began to bawl. For such a little girl, she could emit an unbelievable volume of sound. The empty prairie seemed to fill up with it. Maggie's head began to sink, and she bowed her back. Visions of a bucking horse rose before King David. He wasn't ready for that. "Oh, keep quiet," he bellowed. "Never mind. You can call me King David. Just keep quiet." Queen of Sheba subsided into a wheezy blubber. "And I don't like to ride this horse neither." "You sure are brave and cheerful, Queen of Sheba," said King David furiously. "A real pilgrim. But you ain't big enough to walk all the way we got to go. So just sit there and ride. And keep quiet. Don't do nothing to spook the horse." Directly ahead lay a clump of prickly pear cactus, and King David steered the mare around it. Maggie took a lot of watching. She was skittish about badger holes, startled easily if a bird flew up near her, and she stumbled over every rock. King David was glad Pa had taught him a good deal about handling fractious horses. Now, after traveling for several hours with Maggie, he felt he had learned quite a lot more. "Which way we goin'?" asked Queen of Sheba impatiently. "Straight ahead. Follow those tracks. Easy." But late in the afternoon, he began to wonder just how easy it was going to be. A chill breeze sprang up, and in a few minutes heavy thunderheads began to build on the horizon, and then race toward them. In a remarkably short time, the sun winked out behind the pewter-gray clouds, and soon after that they felt the first raindrops. "Just a shower," King David muttered, buttoning on the bigger of the two coats and handing the smaller one to Queen of Sheba. He took Luke Skinner's hat from under the pack rope. "Don't want the rain to run into my head," he muttered as he gingerly settled it low over his eyes. "Might get some tadpoles in it." He was faintly sorry for having made her bawl. Pa would have walloped him for teasing her, but Queen of Sheba, huddled on Maggie's back like a sparrow on a rail fence, stared blankly at him and did not even smile at his feeble joke. King David thought about making an ugly face at her, but decided it wasn't worth it. Winding the halter rope around his fist, he kicked Maggie in the belly to urge her on. The storm grew heavier as the moments passed, and the prairie, seen through a curtain of rain, began to look watery and indistinct. Thunder crashed in their ears till they felt bruised, and lightning forked down on all sides. The nervous mare snorted and rolled her eyes, and Queen of Sheba screamed. A raging wind now arose and drove the rain straight into their faces like silver nails. The borrowed coats started to leak, and water seeped down their necks. Queen of Sheba began to cry again. Shivering, drenched, blinded by the rain, King David plodded forward, dragging the mare behind him as the water soaked into her collar pad and made wet mops out of her black mane and tail. He tried to look up, search out the trail, but soon realized that his eyes were no match for the storm. All the grass was flattened now. Gouts of water filled every hollow, sheeted from every rise. What he thought were tracks could have been anything, and in a very short time he realized that he had lost the trail. A stab of lightning struck the earth ahead and to the left, and its thunderbolt crashed in their ears. King David staggered, but in the single instant of illumination, he had seen a low bluff directly ahead, a small rise with tumbled rocky walls. Surely there would be an overhang of rock there, something to break the awful force of the storm. Stumbling, struggling, cursing, King David dragged the frenzied mare up the short slope. Ahead were the rocks. There, an overhang. "Oh, Lord," he breathed as he hauled the mare into the shelter behind a jumbled toss of huge boulders. "Thanks, Lord. We couldn't have made it much further." Chapter 10. The rifle, the horse, and now a shelter. Once again they had found help. Not much, but enough to keep them alive. There was a fair-sized cave behind the overhang, and as King David felt his way back into its depths, he could see that it had sheltered many, both men and beasts. There was a litter of small bones, probably rabbits and birds, and some larger ones that looked like antelope or deer. There was even a place where the blackened stone overhead showed that fires had been built there. A few sticks and some buffalo chips that someone had brought and left still lay about, and King David thought longingly of a fire. It would have to be carefully done, though. because even though the fire would not show past the mouth of the cave, the smell of smoke could drift a long way on the wind. He reached up for Queen of Sheba, and she was so tired she simply turned and rolled off the horse into his arms. His knees buckled under her weight before he could ease her to the ground. Then he led the horse to the back of the shelter, where he could tether her to some rocks. The mare lowered her head to snort at the bones, but she was too tired to raise a proper fuss. She kicked irritably. She was probably itching and galled from wearing the harness for so many hours. He would take it off now for a while and try to dry the leather, but first he had to see how safe they were. "You can sit here with your doll," he told Queen of Sheba, as he untied the pack and laid it beside the fire pit. Queen of Sheba sank into a wet, huddled lump, still holding the knobby piece of wood in her arms. "I'll tie the horse up and go take a look around." King David took the rope off the hame and tied one end to Maggie's bridle, paid out a short length, and fastened it as tight as he could around the boulder on the cave floor. Maggie let out a long rattling sigh and snorted up dust from the floor, then quickly fell into a doze, resting one hind foot on the rim. Beads of rainwater dripped off her harness and the longest hairs in her mane and tail. Rifle in hand, King David returned to the opening of the cave. The rain was still falling in a blinding downpour, but he wanted to have a clearer idea of where they were. He glanced back. Queen of Sheba sat where he had dropped her. Her head was bent, and she seemed absorbed in her doll. He had a moment of mild gratitude that she had found the doll. It might keep her from plaguing him so much. Queen of Sheba was fierce about seizing on something and not letting go. Only last winter she had bawled bloody murder when a pretty icicle she had brought into the cabin melted from the heat of the fire. Ma had to give her barley sugar to shut her up. Rifle in hand, King David slipped out past the boulders at the mouth of the cave. As he climbed the last steep pitch of the slope, clambered through a slot in the rimrock, and came out on top of the mesa, he could see that it was larger than he had thought. Maybe more than 1/4 of a mile long in all. The top was flat and grassy, and the upper sides nothing but crumbling reddish-gray rock, with the steeply slanting slopes leading down to the flatter land on all sides. As far as he could see lay only more broken country, and far off to one side a blur of dark blue that might be mountains. He was fairly sure that direction was west. Before the rain started, he had depended on the sun's position for directions, although he hardly needed even that as long as he had the trail of the wagons to follow, which had swung back to a rough northwesterly course. Now the rain, in addition to blotting out sun and stars, would no doubt raise havoc on the trail too, soaking and blurring it. But there was nothing to be done now but to wait it out. When the rain quit, he would have to find the trail again, what was left of it, a matter of circling the butt till he could cross the tract. Pa would probably have been able to track right through the rain, without having to crawl into a cave to wait it out. For a moment he thought hungrily of how good it would be to have Pa up ahead of him again, to see Pa's broad back and his lean brown face, always sober and often frowning, turn like a wedge this way or that, so King David knew which direction to take. With the rain pelting his face, he searched the horizon for a long time, but could see nothing but rolling grassland, with occasional breaks like the one they were on. They were, of course, no signs of another human being anywhere. At last he turned to go back to the cave. On the way he pulled up a huge armful of grass, all he could carry, for the mare. Got to feed her. Got to keep her strong. Take her harness off. Rub her down. Once the mare had her harness off and was comfortably munching her grass, King David sat down to keep watch. The screen of huge boulders, fallen across the front of the cave from the rim above, made a good cover. He was able to see out quite well, but the rocks would block the sight of anyone who might happen to come this way. And the only people likely to be out here were Indians. According to reports he had heard on the wagon train, there were some Indians who were friendly to the settlers. But of course, even if he met up with them, he had no way to tell them from the hostiles. He had heard that the Brule Sioux were no danger to the settlers, but there were those who said they were. And then there were always the Piagan and the Pawnee. King David closed his eyes for a moment as he slumped behind the screen of boulders and saw again the horror of the raid. The dead lying where they had fallen, the overturned and burned wagons, household goods smashed and scattered. Rage against the Indians swept over him. We didn't do nothing to them. All we wanted to do was go from a starved-out farm in Missouri to a new chance in Oregon. We was just crossing their country. Their country. Their country. The words echoed in his mind as he stared out at the alien land before him, vast and empty and threatening. This is their country. Their country. The Sioux, the Arapaho, the Blackfeet, the Crow, the Cheyenne. Like Missouri was our country. At least it was when we lived there. What would we have done if strange people started coming into Missouri, shooting our cattle to eat, like the settlers shoot buffalo? What would we have done if they had grazed their horses on our grass, pushed us off our land? We would have fought back too, he thought dully, just like the Sioux. Oh, Lord, I'm tired. I'm tired of blood and killing. Tired of dead men. Just let us get across this country without leaving no more bones out here. Not theirs, not ours. But how? How to cross this wilderness? Thread the way through a nation of people who, more than likely with good cause, saw him and Queen of Sheba as enemies. If only Pa was here. If only he had Pa to turn to. Pa always knew what to do. Pa knew about so many things, horses, wagons, people, when to stand and fight, and when to just stand fast to win. King David's head ached, and he could almost smell the blood of the massacre again. His wound, which had eased its paining, started to throb. Queen of Sheba, he said abruptly, I'm going to build a little fire and cook some bacon and make some hot mush. Queen of Sheba looked up hungrily. And if you promise to be good, I'll get the knife out and whittle on your doll a little bit. I think I can make it look better. And I'll tear this loose strip off the quilt to make a blanket for your doll. If Queen of Sheba could be kept busy with her doll, she would have less time to cry over icicles, to cry for Ma.